The force field hummed softly as another guard rushed past Kiva's cell, avoiding her piercing gaze. She smirked, trailing a finger along the shimmering energy barrier. Electric sparks crackled against her bronze-hued skin, the ripple of energy making the guard flinch and quicken his pace. Terrified of a woman in a cage, Kiva's melodic voice followed him, echoing off the sterile walls of the orbital prison. But the guard didn't stop. He disappeared around the corner without a word, leaving her alone once again with the constant thrum of the force field. Sighing, Kiva returned to her cot, sitting cross-legged. The standard-issue prison jumpsuit did little to diminish her presence. She'd modified it in her months of captivity, turning the drab garment into something that clung gracefully to her form. Not that anyone stayed long enough to notice. The door to the cell block slid open with a faint hiss. Kiva didn't bother looking up, expecting another trembling guard making their rounds. Instead, a new voice broke the monotony, confident, amused, and unmistakably male. "So this is where they keep the most dangerous woman in 3 sectors? I expected more chains, maybe some ominous lighting." Kiva's head snapped up. A man stood outside her cell, dressed in casual clothes rather than a guard's uniform. His dark hair had streaks of silver at the temples, and his athletic build carried an air of easy confidence. But it was the smirk, half charming, half infuriating, that held her attention. "And you are?" Kiva asked, her voice cool despite her curiosity. "Elias Drexler. But my friends call me Eli." He pulled up the lone chair outside her cell, sitting as if he were at a cafe rather than a prison. "I'm here to study your case." Kiva rose in one fluid motion, pacing to the edge of the force field. "Another scientist here to poke at the monsters?" She leaned close to the barrier. Most people stepped back when she did this. Eli didn't move. "Should I demonstrate my destructive capabilities for your research?" "Actually, I was hoping to discuss quantum mechanics and your molecular manipulation abilities," he replied, his eyes glinting with genuine interest. "Though I wouldn't mind a demonstration. Maybe keep the structural damage minimal." Kiva blinked, momentarily thrown off. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I prefer scientifically curious." Eli leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Tell me, when you break things down at the molecular level, can you control the dispersal pattern? Or is it more of a cascade effect?" She narrowed her eyes. "Are you seriously asking technical questions about my powers? Would you rather I cower in fear like everyone else?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "I find your abilities fascinating. The potential applications could revolutionize everything from construction to space travel." "The applications destroy everything I touch," Kiva said bitterly. Still, she felt herself being drawn into the conversation. "That's why I'm in this cage. Yet you wear clothes, eat food, and sleep on that cot without reducing them to atoms." Eli stood and stepped closer to the force field, his face inches from hers. "Seems to me you have more control than anyone gives you credit for." Their eyes met through the barrier. For the first time in months, Kiva felt seen as something more than a weapon or a monster. It was unsettling. "You're different from the others they've sent," she said. "I'll take that as a compliment." His smile widened. "Though technically, they didn't send me. I may have borrowed some credentials to get in here." Kiva arched an eyebrow. "You broke into a maximum security prison just to talk to me about science?" "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit reckless," Eli admitted with a shrug. "But I read your case file, and something doesn't add up. I hate unsolved puzzles." To her surprise, Kiva felt a smile tugging at her lips. "So, you're not just brave and stupid. You're criminally insane." "I prefer romantically reckless," he said, winking. "Besides, the security here is embarrassingly basic. They rely too much on your reputation. Nobody tries to break in because they're too scared of you, and you're not scared." "Terrified," Eli replied, his tone belying the grin on his face. "Though I'm more worried about what my mother would say if she knew I was flirting with a notorious criminal." Kiva couldn't help it. She laughed. The sound surprised both of them, echoing off the cell walls. "You're flirting with me?" "Attempting to, at least." "Is it working?" "I could kill you without touching you," she reminded him, though her voice had softened. "But you haven't." Eli glanced at his watch. Unfortunately, my borrowed credentials won't hold much longer. I should go before the real Dr. Collier shows up. Kiva surprised herself with her next question. Will you come back? Try to keep me away. Eli turned toward the door, but paused. Oh, and Kiva? When the power fluctuates in exactly 37 minutes, the force field will drop for 2.3 seconds. Just in case you were feeling reckless. Then he was gone, leaving her staring after him with a mixture of confusion and something dangerously close to hope. For the first time in years, Kiva smiled. 37 minutes later, when the lights flickered and the force field wavered, she had her answer. Smiling, she stepped through the barrier, her destructive power carefully held in check. Maybe it was time to see just how reckless she could be. The corridors were eerily quiet as Kiva moved through the station. Her bare feet made no sound against the metal floors. She'd memorized the guard rotations, but something felt off. A hand grabbed her arm from the shadows. Power crackled at her fingertips as she whirled, only to find Eli grinning at her. Nice escape timing, he whispered, but you might want to work on your situational awareness. I was doing fine before you grabbed me, she hissed back, though she didn't pull away from his touch. His hand was warm against her cool skin. Oh, sure. Wandering the halls like a lost tourist. His breath tickled her ear. The exit's this way. Unless you want to give the guards a show. Kiva allowed him to guide her through a maintenance shaft, hyper-aware of their proximity. You planned this, she accused. I plan everything, Eli replied. Well, almost everything. You being even more stunning up close wasn't part of the calculations. Do you ever stop flirting? Would you like me to? Before she could respond, alarms blared. Eli cursed under his breath. That's about 2 minutes earlier than expected. Time for Plan B. There's a Plan B? There's always a Plan B, Eli said with a grin, pulling her into a narrow side corridor. Though fair warning, it's messy, eh? The alarm's shrill cries grew louder, echoing through the corridors as red emergency lights began to pulse. Kiva glanced over her shoulder, her heightened senses picking up the faint vibration of boots pounding on the station's metal floors. Eli didn't seem fazed. He stopped at a secured access panel and pulled out a small device from his jacket pocket, one that looked suspiciously homemade. Cover me for a sec. Cover you? Kiva repeated incredulously, but she didn't have time to argue. 3 guards rounded the corner, their energy rifles raised. Reacting instinctively, she raised her hands. Energy surged through her, crackling across her fingertips as she released a controlled burst of force. The guards' weapons flew from their grips, the shockwave knocking them off their feet without doing permanent harm. I said cover me, not show off. Eli called over his shoulder, still fiddling with the device. Sparks erupted from the panel, and the corridor door ahead hissed open. I didn't kill them, did I? Kiva shot back, stepping closer to Eli as she kept her eyes on the down guards. They groaned, but didn't rise. I'll give you a solid 8.5 for precision, Eli replied as he pulled her through the now open doorway. Docking bays ahead. Great. What's Plan B? Keep running and try not to die. Solid plan, Kiva muttered, but she followed him without hesitation. The docking bay doors loomed in the distance, but the sound of pursuit was getting closer. Eli turned a corner sharply, motioning for her to follow. Almost there. Just one more surprise to deal with. Surprise? Kiva didn't like the sound of that. They skidded to a stop at the bay entrance, only to find a squad of heavily armed guards waiting for them, energy rifles leveled. A tense silence hung in the air. Kiva sighed. You didn't plan for this, did you? Eli held up a finger, grinning. Give me a second. He reached into another pocket, pulling out a small sphere. I'm not completely unprepared. What's that supposed to do? Blind them. Hopefully. Before she could protest further, Eli pressed a button on the sphere and tossed it toward the guards. A blinding flash erupted, followed by a cloud of thick smoke that quickly filled the corridor. Shouts of confusion erupted from the guards as Kiva grabbed Eli's arm, guiding him forward through the chaos. This way, she snapped, relying on her keen senses to navigate. She found the access ramp to Eli's ship and shoved him toward it. Ladies first, Eli said, gesturing gallantly despite the chaos. "Shut up and move," Kiva retorted, practically dragging him aboard. The ramp closed behind them, and Eli sprinted to the cockpit, activating the launch sequence. Engines roared to life as the ship lifted off the docking bay floor. Guards fired wildly at them, but the ship's shields held firm. "Hold on!" Eli shouted as he punched the thrusters. The ship shot forward, narrowly avoiding the closing bay doors. The stars blurred outside the viewport as they rocketed into open space. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems. Kiva leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "Well," Eli said from the pilot's seat, flashing her that infuriating grin. "That went better than expected." "Better?" Kiva arched an eyebrow. "You call almost getting vaporized better? We're alive, aren't we?" He stood, brushing non-existent dust off his jacket. "And I'd say that's worth celebrating." Kiva crossed her arms, watching him warily. "What now, genius? You didn't think this far ahead, did you?" Eli tilted his head, mock offended. "I always think ahead. We'll lay low for a while, let the heat die down. And then, he stepped closer, his expression softening. Then we figure out what you want, Kiva. You've spent so long being told what you are, what you can't do. I think it's time you decided for yourself." Her breath caught at the sincerity in his voice. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. Eli smiled, leaning against the wall beside her. "I'll even throw in that dinner I promised. What do you say?" Kiva allowed herself a small smile. "You're impossible. I've been called worse." The faintest laugh escaped her lips. For the first time in years, Kiva felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost: freedom. "And maybe, just maybe, hope." "Fine," she said. "But if you burn the food, I'm taking over the kitchen." Eli grinned. "Deal." As the ship disappeared into the vast expanse of space, Kiva found herself wondering what lay ahead. And for the first time, she was ready to find out. The ship hummed with a soft, steady rhythm as it cut through the vast emptiness of space. Kiva stood by the viewport, her eyes fixed on the swirling nebulas in the distance. The stars, usually indifferent witnesses to her life, seemed unusually bright tonight. She took a deep breath, her reflection staring back at her, fractured and faintly shimmering in the reinforced glass. Behind her, Eli clattered about in the compact galley. The smell of something savory and, surprisingly, not incinerated wafted toward her. She smirked at the absurdity of it all. Just hours ago, she had been imprisoned, her only companions the silent force field and the fear of those who guarded her. Now she was free, aboard a smuggler's ship, with a man who, for some reason, found her more fascinating than terrifying. "I think you're going to be impressed," Eli called out, breaking her reverie. She turned to find him balancing 2 plates with an exaggerated flourish. "Impressed you didn't set off a fire alarm? Or impressed you remembered to use seasoning?" He gave her a mock-offended look as he set the plates down on a small, fold-out table. "I'll have you know, I'm a man of many talents. Cooking happens to be one of them." Kiva raised an eyebrow, but joined him at the table. She eyed the plates suspiciously. Some sort of roasted protein, paired with what she assumed were vegetables, though they were an alien variety she didn't recognize. "If I die from food poisoning, you're going to feel very guilty," she quipped, picking up her fork. Eli laughed, taking a bite of his own meal. "Trust me, I'd never waste a perfectly good escape plan on a mediocre chef. Now eat. You're going to need your strength." Kiva hesitated for a moment, but finally took a bite. The flavor surprised her. Bold but balanced, a pleasant burst of spice with a subtle sweetness. She blinked at Eli, who smirked knowingly. "All right," she admitted grudgingly. "Not terrible." "You're welcome," Eli said, leaning back in his chair, his plate already half empty. "So, tell me something. What's the first thing you want to do now that you're free?" The question caught her off guard. She set her fork down, staring at her plate, as if the answer might materialize there. What did she want? For so long, her every move had been dictated by others, captors, enemies, even allies who claimed to know what was best for her. Freedom was an abstract concept, something she'd never truly tasted. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. I've spent so much time being feared, hunted, or locked away. Wanting something for myself feels strange. Eli didn't push her. He simply nodded, his gaze thoughtful. That's fair. Freedom can be overwhelming, but it's also the best kind of overwhelming. You'll figure it out. And what about you? She asked, eager to shift the focus. What's your grand plan? Or is breaking dangerous people out of prison your full-time gig? He chuckled, running a hand through his dark hair. Let's just say I got a habit of poking my nose where it doesn't belong. I'm an explorer at heart, not just of space, but of people, ideas, possibilities. And you, Kiva? You're one hell of a possibility. Her cheeks warmed at the sincerity in his voice, though she quickly masked it with a smirk. Careful, Eli. Flattery might get you into trouble. Trouble seems to follow me anyway, he said with a grin. Might as well make it worth my while. Before she could retort, the ship's console beeped urgently. Eli stood, his playful demeanor fading as he moved to the cockpit. Kiva followed, her instincts on high alert. What is it? She asked, her voice sharp. Looks like a patrol ship, Eli muttered, his fingers dancing across the controls. Small. Fast. Definitely armed. Great, Kiva said dryly. You plan for this too, right? Not exactly, Eli admitted. But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. The patrol ship loomed closer on the screen, its sleek, angular design unmistakable. Kiva's pulse quickened as she recognized the insignia on its hull, the crimson crest of the Coalition, the same faction that had locked her away. They'll have my profile, she said. As soon as they scan us, they'll know I'm aboard, which is why we're not going to give them the chance, Eli said, flipping a series of switches. The ship's engines roared as he pushed them to maximum thrust. You're going to try to outrun them? Kiva asked incredulously. Would you prefer I invite them aboard for tea? Eli shot back. The ship shuddered as it accelerated, the stars outside stretching into thin lines. Kiva moved to the weapons console, her hands hovering over the controls. Do we have any firepower? Not much, Eli admitted. This isn't exactly a warship, but there's a couple of pulse cannons if you feel like giving them something to think about. She grinned, her fingers dancing over the interface. Now you're speaking my language. The patrol ship opened fire, its lasers streaking through the void. Eli banked hard to the left, narrowly avoiding the barrage. Kiva's hands moved with precision, targeting the patrol ship's engines. A pulse shot from their cannons, striking the enemy ship and sending it spinning. Nice shot, Eli called over his shoulder. Don't sound so surprised, Kiva replied, her focus razor-sharp. She fired again, disabling the patrol ship's weapon systems. That should buy us some time, Eli said, adjusting their course. Hang on, I'm about to do something reckless. Why does that not surprise me? Kiva muttered, gripping the console as the ship dived sharply toward a nearby asteroid field. The patrol ship struggled to follow, its damaged systems hindering its pursuit. Eli navigated the dense cluster of rocks with skill, weaving between massive asteroids as if he'd done it 100 times before. The patrol ship faltered, colliding with a smaller asteroid and spinning out of control. Moments later, it vanished from their sensors. Eli let out a breath he'd been holding, leaning back in his seat. And that's why you always trust Plan B. Kiva shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. You're insane. Probably, Eli said, grinning. But admit it. You're having fun? She didn't respond, but the faint glimmer in her eyes was answer enough. For the first time in years, Kiva felt alive. And as she looked out at the endless expanse of stars, she realized that maybe, just maybe, freedom was worth the chaos it brought. The stars blurred as Eli's ship settled into a smoother pace, far from the Coalition patrol's reach. The adrenaline in Kiva's veins finally ebbed, leaving her with an unfamiliar mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. She leaned back in the co-pilot's chair, gazing at the endless void. It wasn't just the escape or the fight, it was the possibility. Eli broke the silence, his voice softer than usual. So, where do you want to go? Kiva tilted her head, her gaze flicking to him. Go? As in, I get to choose? Eli shrugged, his hands steady on the controls. That's kind of how freedom works. No more cages, no more orders. Just anywhere you want. She stared at him, trying to grasp the weight of his words. She hadn't thought beyond the prison walls, beyond survival. The idea of choosing a path, her own path, felt almost incomprehensible. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Maybe I'll just drift for a while. Eli grinned. Drifting's not so bad. But something tells me you're not the drifting type. Before she could reply, the ship's console flashed with an incoming signal. Eli's expression darkened as he glanced at the screen. Unidentified transmission. Could be trouble. Kiva frowned, standing and crossing to the console. Can you trace it? He nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers, faint but audible. To the woman you carry. Surrender her, or face destruction. Kiva's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Jork Malin, the Coalition's relentless hunter who had captured her years ago. A skilled tracker with no mercy. He was a predator who never let his prey escape. Eli glanced at her. Friend of yours? Hardly, Kiva said, her jaw tightening. He's the one who put me in that cell. Eli swore under his breath, toggling the comms. Sorry, buddy, but we're fresh out of prisoners. Try somewhere else? Malin's response was instant. Then die with her. A red blip appeared on the ship's radar. Malin's cruiser, closing fast. Eli turned to Kiva, his playful demeanor replaced with sharp focus. We can't outrun that. Kiva nodded grimly, her mind racing. Then we don't. We fight. Eli hesitated. You sure? That ship's packing enough firepower to turn us into space dust. I'm not going back, Kiva said firmly, her emerald eyes blazing. And I'm not letting you get caught in this. Eli smirked, his hands already working the controls. You think I'd let you have all the fun? Let's even the odds. He activated the ship's cloaking system, the faint shimmer enveloping them as they vanished from view. Kiva moved to the weapons console, scanning Malin's cruiser. The ship was heavily armored, bristling with weapons. Taking it head-on would be suicide. Focus on his engines, Eli said, his voice steady. If we can disable his mobility, we might have a shot. Kiva nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls. The ship darted through the void, slipping past Malin's scanning systems. When they emerged from the cloak, Kiva unleashed a precise volley of fire at the cruiser's rear thrusters. The impact rocked Malin's ship, but it wasn't enough. The cruiser retaliated with a barrage of missiles, forcing Eli to bank hard. Alarms blared as the ship trembled under the assault. Shields down to 40%. Eli shouted, We can't take much more of this. Kiva gritted her teeth, her frustration mounting. Her destructive power surged within her, a force she had spent years suppressing. She turned to Eli. Get me close. What? Eli blinked at her. You can't be serious. I can stop him, Kiva said, her voice firm. But I need to be closer. Eli hesitated, searching her face for any hint of doubt. Finding none, he nodded. Hold on. He pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through Malin's relentless fire. Kiva steadied herself, closing her eyes and focusing on the energy coursing through her. She had always feared her power, but now she embraced it. As Eli brought them within striking distance, Kiva placed her hands on the ship's hull. Her power flowed outward, reaching toward the cruiser. She visualized its molecular structure, its intricate systems, and then she unraveled it. Malin's cruiser shuddered violently, its hull splintering as Kiva's power dismantled it piece by piece. Explosions rippled through the massive ship, and within moments, it was reduced to a drifting wreck. The silence that followed was deafening. Eli let out a shaky laugh, his grip on the controls relaxing. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Kiva sank into her seat, her breathing heavy. The weight of what she had done pressed on her. But there was no regret, only relief. Eli turned to her, his expression softer. You okay? She nodded slowly. Yeah, for the first time in a long time. I think I am. As the debris of Malin's ship faded into the distance, Kiva looked out at the stars. They no longer felt cold and indifferent. They felt alive, vibrant, full of promise. Where to now? Eli asked, his tone light. Kiva smiled faintly. Anywhere. Everywhere. Let's see what freedom really means. Eli grinned, throttling the ship forward. Then hold on, Kiva. This is just the beginning. The stars stretched before them, endless and full of possibility. For the first time, Kiva didn't feel like a prisoner of her own power. She felt free, and it was worth everything.